Professor Carrie Brown for giving me this opportunity to talk about my new book, The Dragon Roars Back, published by Stanford University Press. Let me get the. Okay. This book traces the rise and driving forces of China's rise in the last 70 years. When I give a book talk like this, the first question people would ask is, why you write this book? And my answer to this question is that I was motivated by two considerations. One is empirical, the other is theoretical. Empirically, I have been teaching a course called The Making of Chinese Foreign and Security Policy for many, many years. I've tried to find a comprehensive book for my class, but I have found that books on Chinese foreign policy making and Chinese foreign policy dynamics has been mostly unidimensional and statics. When I said that, I meant most books, almost all the books on Chinese foreign policy has been focused on China's bilateral relationships with individual countries or individual areas, and all focus on China's policy on certain issue areas such as energy, environment, or nuclear, or whatever issue areas. A systematic investigation of the foreign policy dynamics over the last 70 years that covers very comprehensive issue areas and countries up to date, historically in depth and up to date has not been there. Really mysterious for me. We cannot find that kind of book. So that's why I'm writing this book, to fill this empirical gap. Theoretically, two theories in my book. In fact, I try to cover all variety of theoretical perspectives, but I found the two most popular theoretical perspectives that people have used to explain China's foreign policy transformation are structural realism and the regime type theory. Structural realist theory focuses on relative power of a state and argues that as China's relative power I can pause another 2 seconds. Okay, so a structural realist theory argues that when China's relative power increases, its ambition expands. Increasingly powerful China would inevitably redefine its national interests expansively and to increase its disputes with its neighbors and inevitably challenge the US dominance in the international system. But this theory might be helpful for understand a certain period of China's foreign policy, especially current. China is becoming a rising power, so China's foreign policy has become more expensive. But if you look at all over more than 70 years of PRC history, you can find this theory would not be sufficient, because when the PRC was founded after 1949, China's relative power was very, very weak, was relatively weak. And Mao Zedong's foreign policy was very confrontational and had a so-called revolutionary foreign policy. Mao, during his tenure, fought 6 wars, including the war with the most powerful nation in the world, the United States, in the Korean Peninsula, and fought a war with the former Soviet Union, and fought a war with India. And Mao also supported those third world insurgencies, revolutionary movements. Deng Xiaoping came to office, moderated Chinese foreign policy, but China's relative power did not change that much. And Deng Xiaoping, during his tenure, only fought 1 war in Vietnam. And his successors, Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, continued the moderate foreign policy. But China's relative power at that period increased dramatically. And Xi Jinping came to office, shifted moderate foreign policy to a very confrontational foreign policy in the last 10 years. But China's economic growth in the last 10 years has been slowing down. And China's relative power, relative capacity increased, but not increased in proportion to Xi Jinping's power ambition. So that's why scholars like my former advisor, Suisheng Zhao, had a very recent book called Overreach, arguing that China is overreaching. When we say overreaching, we talk about it set foreign policy objectives beyond its power capacity. So structural realism in that context cannot help us to understand this over 70 plus years of Chinese foreign policy transformation. Regime type theory attributes China's so-called confrontational or aggressive foreign policy to China's authoritarian nature of regime. In that case, in order to have a foreign policy change, you have to change the regime. But China regime, authoritarian regime has not changed in the last 70 years. But Chinese foreign policy has a lot of turns, shifts, as I mentioned, in the last 70 years. So in that context, my book develops a leadership-centered approach or framework, and argues that leaders matter in all political systems, but matter more in Leninist authoritarian system. Elected leaders in democracies are constrained, we all know, by oppositional parties, by public opinions, by term limits, or whatever, these type of limitations. But authoritarian leaders in Leninist regime, China's regime has been Leninist regime, where the emphasis is discipline, hierarchy, and in Chinese term, democratic centralism. And in that context, authoritarian leaders in the PRC, in fact, possessed tremendous power to set foreign policy directions or whatever other policies. But the issues here is that the the puzzle here is that not every leader, top leader in the PRC history has been able to use that power and set new directions of Chinese foreign policy. From founding of PRC to up to date, the official description said 5 generations of Chinese leaders. Mao, Deng, Jiang, Hu, Xi, 5. But I count for 8. Mao, Hua Guofeng, Deng Xiaoping, Hu Yaobang, Zhao Ziyang, then Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, and Xi Jinping. 8 leaders. Not every of these 8 leaders have been able to use that power to make new directions of Chinese foreign policy. Why? In that case, I distinguished in my book those 8 leaders into 3 types. One I called transformational leaders. These are game changers. Why they are game changers? Because they have new visions. Not only they have new visions, but they can also survive the jungle of power politics in the PRC. Not only they can survive, but also they mobilize domestic and international sources to advance their policy agenda, to appeal using those kind of ideals to mobilize, inspire followers who are transformational leaders in the PRC history. 3, Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, and Xi Jinping. Each of them set a new course for Chinese foreign policy. In my book, I described Mao Zedong had revolutionary foreign policy. Deng Xiaoping has a developmental foreign policy, and Xi Jinping has a great power foreign policy. In the Chinese official terms, Mao Zedong made China stand up, Deng Xiaoping made China rich, and Xi Jinping is going to make China strong. So they each have a new foreign policy. The second type of leaders are transactional leaders. These leaders stayed in power, but also on the course set by their predecessors. Who are transactional leaders? Jiang Zemin, Hu Yaobang, Deng Zemin, and Hu Jintao are typical transactional leaders. They survived the jungle of politics, stayed in power for 8 years. But they stayed also on course set by Deng Xiaoping. Third type are failed leaders. These leaders, you can see, Hua Guofeng, Hu Yaobang, and Zhao Ziyang. They might have some new visions, but who cares? They lost power. So they could not make any significant impact on Chinese foreign policy or Chinese policy transformation. So my book documented the 3 transformational leaders, how they what were their new visions, and how they exercised their power, either personalistic or institutional power, and how they mobilized domestic resources. Here, when I saw domestic resources, I'm talking about educational resources. Here, talking about historical memories and nationalist aspirations, and also institutional resources, how to restructure institutions to help backing their foreign policy priorities, and also exploit the international sources. Here, I'm talking about how they strategically responded to global power distribution and world order. When there's an order, we're talking about regimes, institutions, norms, those things. But today's talk, I will not talk about the book itself now, because just give you some ideas of the book. Now I'm going to talk about the how Xi Jinping have centralized foreign policy making power, and what are the foreign policy implications of his power centralization. So those are I'm going to talk about. Before we talk about Xi Jinping's power concentration, I want to give you a brief idea about the foreign policy making hierarchy in China. There are three levels of foreign policy making hierarchy in China, serving under the paramount leaders here, Xi Jinping or whoever. One is the decision-making institutions. We're talking about Party Central Committee, which meets only once a year, then Politburo Standing Committee meets regularly and make decisions on behalf of the Central Committee. Even they also make foreign policy decisions. A second level is what the Chinese called 协调议事机构. They are policy coordination and deliberation organizations. These are opaque party organizations work behind the scenes to assist the paramount leader, the top leaders on pressing issues and on interdepartmental manner. The third tier is line bureaucracies in the party, government, and military. Each paramount leader, here I'm talking about transformational leaders, they have a different leadership style to work with this hierarchy. Mao Zedong, he was a founder of the PRC, and he had a very, very strong charismatic authority. And from that perspective, I would say he was a crusader because he made strategic and national security decisions top down. And he very often, when he met with Nixon, he said, I'm a philosopher. I'm not working on those specific issues. Talk to Premier Zhou Enlai. In other words, he delegated authority dealing with bureaucracy to Zhou Enlai, which he trusted. And Deng Xiaoping had also very different leadership style. He was a pragmatic, strong leader. And but he never held top party and government positions. And he placed his proteges on those positions. He was standing behind the string. And so he had a totally different leadership style called, delegation by consensus. He delegated decision-making, and especially those routine foreign policy, including domestic policy decision-making authorities to bureaucrats and to those in the forefront. And he ratified those decisions if they can reach consensus. He steps in only they could not reach consensus. So this is the consensus building process. He built consensus. And his successors, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, continued this process of consensus decision-making style under a so-called collective leadership. Deng Xiaoping exercised collective leadership, but his successors exercise collective leadership to build consensus. And Xi Jinping now has changed everything. Again, arguably, I will argue that has become the most powerful leader in the PRC history. He basically eliminated all the potential political rivals and placed all Xi's men, Xi's people. In fact, the 20th Party Congress, this Party Congress, Politburo Standing Committee did not have a single woman. So all Xi's men into those important positions based upon their personal loyalty to Xi rather than merits. In the past, scholars, people argue that meritocracy was important. No longer for Xi. Personal loyalty is much more important than meritocracy. And so he's running the country without credible or identifiable rival, and upset a long-standing practice of internal power balance. Mao Zedong was balanced by Liu Shaoqi, Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping was balanced by Chen Yun and some other elders. Jiang Zemin was balanced by Deng Xiaoping. Hu Jintao was balanced by Jiang Zemin and his people. Who is balancing Xi Jinping today? I cannot identify any. I don't know if you know some internal stories, but maybe Professor Brown will know that. But in any case, I don't see anyone now is balancing Xi Jinping. And so decision-making style transformed, changed completely from a consensus building process to a Xi in command model. Xi Jinping himself making decisions, all other people say, yes, sir. That's what we see today in the decision-making process. And Xi Jinping himself emphasized called 顶层设计, top level design. Top level, he's at the very top. And he, in fact, has become a micromanager. He in fact, try to manage everything. Where's the toilet should be? That's what he is cared. If he tried to, I mean, he was at some point the head of public places to have a toilets. So he's chairman of everything, and he's running the country, making decisions. Everything he cares, just to make decisions personally, promoting them personally. Now the questions are, how has he reached this point of power? And what are the foreign policy implications of his power consolidation? So those are two questions I'm going to discuss today further. Three triggers for Xi Jinping's power consolidation. One was the elites' complaints before him or during his time coming to power that Hu Jintao's collective leadership was too weak, and the factional makeup of that leadership was too divisive to curb massive corruptions at that time, and also to resist liberal ideas. We all remember those liberal ideas were rampant and threatening Communist Party's monopoly of power. The second trigger was high-profile political scandals just right when he took office, 2022. 薄熙来, Zhou Yongkang, Lin Jihua, all those scandals gave him opportunity. And third was Chinese elites rising nationalist aspirations and confidence after China successfully held the Olympic game 2008. Then followed that was a financial crisis. They were very confident, very proud, but they were also very frustrated, Chinese elites, because they were so upset about the so-called anti-China forces in the West. who wanted to undermine China's rise, resist China's rise, and did not recognize China's rising power position. In response to these three triggers, Xi Jinping presented himself as a strong man, visionary leader, and ready to fight for China's facing China new threat, unprecedented, he thought, like the Soviet Union that brought down the Soviet Union. So he said, I'm going to make sure the Communist Party will stay in power forever. Strong leader. So he got consent of the ruling elites. In response to the corruption, scandals, he launched a widespread anti-corruption campaign, which purged all those potential rivals and placed them with his confidants, his own people. And in the meantime, he presented his new vision, the China Dream. And in fact, days after he took the General Secretary position, 2012, in November, he went to the China History Museum to give that talk of China's great rejuvenation. And that type of talks to restore China to the top position it occupied many years ago really resonate the mode of the time, assertion, nationalist aspiration, and the confidence, and also help them to resolve those frustration and problems. So Xi Jinping quickly consolidated his power. When he consolidated his power, this consolidation of power has been also institutionalized in the foreign policy making arena, hierarchy. In fact, this is the policy making hierarchy under Xi Jinping, which described also in my book. He at three levels, at the decision-making level, coordination level, and bureaucratic level. Let me briefly discuss all the three levels of Xi Jinping's power consolidation. At the decision-making level, Xi has built the personal loyalty to him as the most important political principle guiding actions among members of party state. In fact, from this you can see, I just list some of them. He reduced the size of a Politburo Standing Committee. He established in the 18th Party Congress, established himself called the Party Center 19th Committee. Then he amended the PRC Constitution. And he had all the Politburo Standing Committee members and all other important top leaders to report personally to him about their performance. In fact, those kind of report system was established by Hu Jintao. When Hu Jintao established that reporting system, was a central committee as institution. Politburo as institution reported to the central committee. Then he changed that each individual Politburo member report to him. In that case, he will be the supreme leader. And also, he had all those kind of for consciousness to safeguards to establish his type. Basically, he established the code of personality. And at the decision-making level, he established absolute authority. At the policy coordination level, he also tried to establish new coordination institutions with himself as the head to go around bureaucracy. In fact, the coordination, central coordination organization was established by Mao Zedong in 1958. He built 7 central leadership small groups, 领导小组. One of them was Foreign Affairs Leadership Group, but this Foreign Affairs Group was banned, and all those leadership small groups were banned during the Cultural Revolution in 1970. And Deng Xiaoping restored Foreign Affairs Small Leadership Group in 1981. And since then, for many years, the Central Foreign Affairs Leadership Small Group was the only non-standing foreign affairs leadership group. Then when Deng Xiaoping opened up reforms, there was increasing number of players in foreign policy making arena, and there are increasing issues needed to be coordinated. And in 1999, in fact, there was an embassy bombing event. The NATO NATO forces bombed the Chinese embassy. And at that time, people were talking about if China needed a crisis management coordination institution, like America's National Security Council. And Jiang Zemin built one next year, 2020, called the Central National Security Leadership Small Group, 国家安全领导小组. Then when Hu Jintao came to office, 2009, 2010, the maritime disputes became intensified. And there are 9 institutions, 九龙戏水, China said, so many institutions were involved in the maritime security issues. And then 2010, Hu Jintao built a new coordination institution called the Protecting Maritime Rights and Interests Leadership Small Group. The problem here is that from this chart, you can see that these leadership small groups, they are not regular institutions. They are ad hoc meetings of those stakeholders. So they did not have regular staff. Their staff support from a very interesting organization called Central Foreign Affairs Office, 中央外办. So all 3 institutions relied staff support. They are short of staff support. They could not make regular policy analysis. They could serve only as a crisis response institution. So Xi Jinping came to office, quickly realized this problem, and he used this opportunity to enhance his coordination authority. The first thing he did, 2013, was to build National State Security Commission, 国家安全委员会. This institution, we thought at that time would be like a US National Security Council. In fact, the Jiang Zemin one was not like the National Security Council. And this one was also different from National Security Council either. Someone want to come in? Oh. I just lost. Oh, okay. Yeah, I got lost too. And this commission, National Security State Security Commission, was supposed to focus on both internal security and external security, but quickly it focused on only internal security with connection with external threats. And internal security becomes its focus. In that case, Xi Jinping built another institution called not build another institution, upgraded Central Foreign Affairs Leadership Small Group into Central Foreign Affairs Commission. 中央外事工作委员会 Commission and small group. Are they similar? Very different. One is more formal, more bureaucratic, like the other is informal. In fact, the Central Foreign Affairs Commission now becomes very, very powerful institution. Xi Jinping himself is head of that commission. And who is the office director? Wang Yi now. When Wang Yi goes to meetings now overseas, what is his title? He's a Politburo member. His title is 办公室主任, the director of office of Central Foreign Affairs Commission. That means this is upgrade of these bureaucratic ranks. And in order to enhancing this coordination function, Xi Jinping has held more frequent Central Foreign Affairs work conferences. Before him, Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, Mao Zedong, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao each had one Central Foreign Affairs work conference. Xi Jinping came to office in the last 10 years, already held 3. And he also changed those every 5 years Chinese diplomatic envoys conference to annual conference, to call them back, to listen to his instructions, to make sure they follow his policy line. So his coordination capacity has been increased dramatically. At the bureaucratic level, Xi Jinping has basically politicized. Xi Jinping has politicized and enlarged foreign policy bureaucracies. For many years before Xi Jinping, since Deng Xiaoping's reform, Chinese bureaucrats, especially China's diplomats, saw themselves as professionals and recognized as professionals. But there was a paradoxical transformation of their political status. The more they become professionalized, the less politically they were important. For example, the post-foreign minister position declined from Politburo member to vice premier to state councilor. And acting foreign minister were never able to reach in the last 20 years before Xi Jinping and reach to the level of state councilor. And morale of foreign ministry, you talk to people, declined a lot during those years. And Xi Jinping reversed this trend. He promoted Yang Jiechi from, post-foreign minister to the Politburo, and put Wang Yi, when he was still foreign minister, as a state councilor in 2018. And now Qin Gang, even in 3 months, he became foreign minister, then he became state councilor. Political status increase came with a different requirement for them. He now required Chinese diplomats to be considered themselves first as their loyalty to the party instead of professionals. Professionalism has been given up to political loyalty to the party. That's very important. And also Xi Jinping has enlarged the party diplomacy, the party central committees, international department, propaganda department, and United Front department. They used to performing those functions behind the scenes. Now he pushed them to the forefront and give them more resources, and also in the military diplomacy has really expanded. And even the the defense minister does have an international exchange department that is moved to the Central Military Commission, International Military Cooperation Department. So he took control of bureaucracy. The question now becomes, what are the foreign policy implications of Xi Jinping's power concentration? There are so many important implications. I will mention very briefly 3 important changes of Chinese foreign policy behavior. The first is the change in the incentive structure of Chinese diplomats from performing professionalism to demonstrating their political loyalty as a means of survival. And before Xi Jinping's time, China diplomats, their job was to make friends, to turn enemies into friends. That's diplomacy, to make diplomatic negotiations. And now they are required to follow Xi Jinping's fighting spirit, to demonstrate their ability to win diplomatic battles. Diplomacy became a battle to win. And they are now required to follow Xi's baseline thinking, 底线思维, and set red lines for foreign countries to follow. In that case, Chinese diplomats have become warriors. And the foreign ministry for many years was criticized by Chinese netizens for lack of bones. And they received the calcium tablets to make them strong. Now they recast themselves as a very powerful defender of China's foreign policy. And the Chinese diplomats also changed. Yang Jiechi, people knew him before Xi Jinping's time as a very professional diplomat. He spoke good English. He had a good connection with Bush family as a Tiger Young. People knew him at that time. Now, no longer. Wang Yi, when he was ambassador to Japan, you talk to people in Japan, they thought, wow, he was a professional. And also he was a leading scholar at Georgetown. People knew him, very modest and eager to learn. Now they are totally different. These 2 top diplomats, when they met their counterparts from the Joe Biden administration first time in Alaska, that was a totally different people. Do you recognize them? Yang Jiechi told Dick Sullivan and Tony Blinken that US, you are no longer in the position you can no longer talk China in the from position of power. And you have to change your bad habits to interfere in China's domestic affairs, to stop promoting diplomacy and democracy, everything. Totally different people now. And enlarge the diplomacy, party diplomacy and military diplomacy also made China's international behavior changed a lot. I mean, in the US, people are so concerned about China influence operation. Who are those institutions behind those influence operation? China Communist Party Central Committee, United Front Department, and the Propaganda Department, and the military diplomacy. I mean, China's current very coercive diplomacy on the Taiwan issue by the military. So China's foreign policy behavior changed. The second aspect of change is that, personally, I don't think Xi Jinping's those kind of triumphalism is working well, because as I mentioned earlier, China is overreached. And this overreach is manifested in a lot of China's neighbors, a lot of possible partners, valued partners now became China's rivals. And also his aggressive behavior has united China's rivals for sure, and alienated a lot of China's possible friends and expedite China's economic slowdown and isolation. And Xi Jinping saw all these responses as a threat to China's national security. Here, more importantly, he thought that was a threat to China's regime security. And so he proposed a new concept called the integrated approach to development and security. In other words, he elevated security to the top priority of Chinese foreign policy. For many years in Deng Xiaoping's years, foreign policy was to serve domestic economic development by creating peaceful international and regional environment. Now, no longer. If there is a conflict between economic development and security, he will sacrifice economic development for national security. So this change has increased China's tolerance, and it is for his tolerance to escalation, and also for economic pushback from other countries, and has caused a lot of new tensions with foreign countries, particularly with the United States. For Xi Jinping, he's so clear that US will not want to see China rise. So he sees US as a major threat to China's national security, and he has taken tit for tat confrontation with the United States. And so China's behavior in that case become more assertive, but also more confrontational. The third aspect is that I don't see Xi Jinping has the charismatic leadership or charismatic authority as Mao Zedong had. And Xi Jinping has commanded obedience by coercive force, by fear. In that case, nobody around him would dare to tell him the truth, any truth he would not want to see. People want to only tell him what he wants to listen. In that case, he is making foreign policy decisions in a Bible, just like Putin making decisions to invade Ukraine. And so in that context, I mean, here I talk about whoever disagrees him, he said arbitrarily commenting against the center, and also against his personal leadership. This would minimize the opportunity of his wrong decisions to be corrected. So China's decision-making process has entered a vicious cycle. As a ruthless leader, he could make wrong decisions. And those wrong decisions would have dire consequences. And when he made those kind of wrong decisions with consequences, he will become defensive. Just like Mao Zedong in 1959, 57, 59, he made all those mistakes. Then he became so defensive. He launched one after another political campaigns, made more mistakes. So this will be the similar situation for China today in the Xi Jinping years. And if he make a wrong decision like that, there could be intended or unintended consequence of no return. For example, if he decide to invade Taiwan, we talk about that issue, and everybody will tell him, we're ready. We can take Taiwan in 24 hours. Even China, in fact, could not do that. So in that case, we cannot think China's decision-making environment is a rational environment. We cannot use rational decision-making model to understand China's foreign policy making process. So that will make China's foreign policy making incoherent, irrational, and unpredictable. So I will stop here. Those are some questions I think we can think about Xi Jinping's foreign policy making, and Xi Jinping's power concentration and foreign policy making implications. So I'll stop here, and so we can have a Q&A.